as I said, my name is Ineke, and the spelling is I-N-E-K-E, and that doesn't help with knowing how to say it, so I respond to most everything. But it's a Dutch name because I grew up in the Netherlands. I came to this country as an adult, and I did my graduate education in this country. So I went to seminary, I went to graduate school for Christian education first, and then I went to seminary in Virginia, and so I was ordained in 1982. I served churches as a settled or installed pastor, and then my husband had some opportunities, so we had to balance two careers, and I was a trailing spouse for a while, and we moved around the country, and that's how I ended up becoming an interim pastor, because we moved from Virginia through Connecticut to Wisconsin. And when I went to the clergy meeting and I met the person that had a job like I have now, I said, well, I'm here, I'm looking for work. And he said, you want an interim? And I said, well, I don't know much about it, but 2 weeks later I started a job. And so that's kind of how I fell into interim work, and discovered that I really loved that particular unique flavor of ministry, which is very different. So I did several of those in Wisconsin, and then we ended up moving again. And so we've traveled throughout the country in a variety of places, and we went from the Midwest to the Northwest, and then back to the Midwest, and then I landed as an interim on the conference staff in the Michigan Conference, where I was asked to come as an Interim Associate Conference Minister because they didn't know much about interim work, and because I had done a lot of that, and I've done the last 15 years, I've been a trainer of interim with the Interim Ministry network, because that keeps me learning. So I did that for a while, and then I landed in Connecticut, and I was on the staff of the Connecticut Conference, not as an interim, but as a regional minister, which is the same. They just call it regional minister versus associate conference minister. I did that for about 7.5 years. And then I went back, and I felt like I wanted to be in a local church again, so I did an interim in Connecticut in a congregation. And then when that was finished, there wasn't anything available at the time, and I got a little phone call from Rick Coles, who was the interim conference minister here. Would you be interested in doing some work for the conference in Maine? And so that's why I'm here. So I've been here since October, and my contract is currently till the end of March next year. And because the conference itself is kind of in a state of interim life, even though the new conference minister will be here, hooray, next week. The whole conference voted last fall at the annual meeting, which was the day after I started, to implement this new governance structure and whole new program. So that was exciting to me. I like projects and new things and adventures. So part of my responsibility is that we're looking at kind of trying to turn my job into 2 half-time jobs at some points to shake things up. So I'm working with many of the churches that are in transition currently in the whole conference. Even though my colleague Darren Morgan, who lives in Bangor, is basically working in the new role of the Associate Conference Minister, working to help coordinate the new resource teams that are being formed. He's doing some of this work too, because of, I live in Westbrook, and some of the time, driving time and those kind of things of covering all the geography. So I'm here tonight to kind of introduce myself and to say my role is to walk on this journey through transition with you. And so some of the experts that talk about change and transition talk about change is kind of what happens outside. That's kind of the things that are happening in the world, and you have a change because your pastor bless his heart, is going to be retiring. Some of us are jealous about that, but, and are waiting for that at some point in our life too. That's a change, that is an outward change that's happening. Transition is actually the inside process that we use to get used to that. So times of transition are dealing with changes, but with more than that. And so the journey through transition is one of great opportunity. It also is an opportunity to reflect, to take stock and inventory, and that's really what the piece is about. Now, the way that we do things in the United Church of Christ and the way that our polity works is that our search and call process tends to be a process of discernment, and it's a timely process. It's not just an HR-related project. It's not, we're just going to put an ad in the paper and we're going to hire a new pastor. It is a process that involves kind of thinking about, you as a congregation need to put together a resume. All of our pastors that are looking for new positions cannot do that before they put together their resume. We call those profiles, but that's really what they are. They are resumes. So that's a process that needs to be tended to very carefully, and you need to give yourself some time because you need to kind of know who you are. And when there is a change and a transition, like your pastor is leaving, you've been together for how many years?
Almost 11.
Almost 11, that's a long time. That means you've been kind of a family together in a lot of ways. That's changing. And so that means you're going to be a new community and a different community. And so you need to give yourself some time to kind of adjust, readjust, and take stock. And I think that time of transition, on some level, it is a process of grieving, because it's grieving a loss, and we have all sorts of losses in our life. So the whole transition process and the time that we call the in-between time, or interim time, transitional time, whatever we name it, is a time that can be rich with opportunities for really reflecting and helping ourselves to reorient ourselves and to then say, okay, we are a new community, a different community. In order for us to really be clear about what we're looking for in our next pastoral leader, we have some work to do. And that's why we suggest that we bring people in that are trained to do this work. And usually interim pastors, the training that's offered to many of them is training it's training that helps identify and work with congregations, not only to kind of keep the regular ministry and mission of the congregation moving forward, but in addition to that, involves some particular work of reflection, of discernment. I always have said, when I've done this with congregations as a pastor and as an intentional interim pastor, I've identified myself as, I am not really, it's not really about me, but I'm going to be a pastoral leader, and I'm going to be carrying around in front of me, imagine me carrying around a large mirror. Because my job is to really invite you as a congregation to look in the mirror. And that's one kind of metaphor that I use, because it's your congregation. And so I will participate in that work as an interim pastor, as somebody who will listen to your stories, will ask lots of questions, and then say, this is what I hear. Is this right? Or, I don't understand this. What does this mean? Help me understand this. So there's a variety of ways in which interim pastors will help the work that needs to be done in order so you can put together a resume that says, okay, this is who we are now. a group of people, a faith community without currently a pastor. We have lost our pastor of 11 years. We've been in a community together, so that's gone now, and we want to look forward and move into the future. So what are some of the things that we need to tend to so that when a new person is going to come in our midst, that person can begin ministry right away, and that doesn't get surprised by some of the things that, we need to tend to. So some of the other metaphors I've used, it's a time to do some fall cleaning or spring cleaning, or, you kind of do some inventory, like when you move, I've moved a lot in my house. So my mother-in-law, who was 96 years old, moved last summer from her home where she'd lived for 50 years to an assisted living place finally. And as children and outlaws and in-laws and all that stuff, we kind of had to go through the house. Well, there was a lot of things that was very surprising. And it was an enormous task because of, all the things. We found yellow pages from 1992 and, all those kind of things. So some of that work also gets done on a systemic level as a community, saying, okay, we're going to clean the cupboards, metaphorically speaking, get the cobwebs out. Sometimes we need to look at what skeletons we have in there. Some of them are really wonderful and pretty, and they need to be there because they're saints of the church. So you dust them off, you put it back in there, give them a new hat. But some skeletons might just need to be put out and saying, we need to offer them as burnt offerings on the altar because they've made us stumble, but we need to do some of that. So that's kind of the work that interim pastors are about. They come in to help kind of make way, clear the path, and find a way to help you as a congregation to say, who are we now without the pastor that we've lost? And who do we want to be? So that's kind of the work of an interim, and that takes some time. So the transition process is not just tasks, but it's some emotional work too. And we all do that at different rates. We all adjust to change in different ways. So we need to kind of give ourselves some room to do that. And so that's the first task is number one of the very first tasks that you all need to do is you need to say goodbye to one another. Because that's really important. It's very, very important. So the piece of the puzzle, you have a little one-page overview in front of you, and we're only going to talk about the first top part, because that's really the beginning of the process. And I'm saying I'm going to walk with you through this process, and you don't need to worry about doing things at fast speeds. You need to give yourself permission to give yourself some time. And so if you see, tonight you received and accepted with regret the resignation of your pastor. And so these are some ways in which, you need to kind of begin doing the work of the transitional period. And that's the first order of the day is to plan a party and to do things that are important that need to be done. And some of them, are in this piece. We have a resource that's available that is probably about 150 pages or something, and that comes in lots of sections. We in the United Church of Christ like to overload people with all sorts of paperwork. I've discovered that I don't do very well with that, and that's why I put together one-page thing, because people are more likely to read that. But the other information is important information, and some people might want to look at that. Pam has the first two sections of that manual, which is a journal through transitions. It's to be found on our United Church of Christ website. There are all sorts of, lots of materials, but I didn't want to overwhelm you with all of that because, you know, that we might have some questions too. But before doing anything is the first piece is to say goodbye. And then you probably, I would suggest, and you don't have to, but it would be helpful to have kind of a couple of people that could be called your transition team. And they would help kind of manage the transition process in a way that will be helpful. Because you will then hopefully find a way to do some thinking about what you might want to accomplish during the time of this transition time. What are some of the things that need to happen, you know, before you really can be welcoming somebody new? What are some of the things you want to accomplish during this transition time? Because some congregations think, oh my God, we're just going to get stuck and we're not going to be able to do anything. Your ministry and your mission is going to continue. Your interim pastor is going to help you continue that. But your mission and ministry doesn't stop. But there might be new ways in which God is calling you to do certain things, and what are some of the things that need to get done? This might be a good time to do that. Interim pastors tend to have some real skills, or to have colleagues that have skills that come in and help you do some of those things. Pam was great, you know, she gracefully shared with me that you had already done some of your visioning work. That is wonderful. That will be a real gift to your interim too. And because that's kind of some work, that's really important work that happens often too during that time. You know, what do we want to be when we grow up, right? We all ask those questions, and I still ask that question. So as we grow and change, we need to reflect on that, and we do that together in many ways. But you say goodbye, you put a team together, and then you know, what I will do is I'll find out and see what kind of people are available to do interim work, you know, and there'll be a small, usually, and I don't know how it works in your bylaws or whatever, your constitution, but usually there's a small group of people that will kind of form kind of an interim search committee. It's not a long, drawn-out search process, but you kind of think about what are some of the things that we want to accomplish. I look around and see who's all available. Who might be some people that you could interview and who might be available to do this interim work for you. And so that person would come on board. Sometimes congregations, you know, if they need to do some work, sometimes there's bridge people that happen, you know, that come in for a little bit just to do the basics of worship leadership and pastoral care stuff, until you find the right interim, even though, you know, it's not a long drawn out, but you want to make sure that somebody is kind of a good fit for you too. So that's them. And then the interim person comes on board, you begin your work, and then after a little while, you might think about putting together a pastoral search committee. But I would, you know, usually it's good to wait a little bit, because you want to have some sense of what are some of the things that we need to work on? What do we want to accomplish during this time? And how do we really want we want to know the best possible way for us to put together our resume. Because that's the task of the search committee. And so maybe I'll stop here and see if anybody has any questions at this point.
A quick comment: in our bylaws, the organization that's responsible for the interim search is the deacons.
Okay, good. Okay.
Okay. Do you need any more? Okay. Okay.
Yes.
Do you have a sense that there are a number of appropriate interims that might be interested in this position?
Sure.
In the area?
I'm sure there are. I mean, I'm scouting around because, you know, the nature of interim work is it's always shifting. And so, you know, there are, at the moment, I'm working with anywhere between 20 and 25 churches somewhere in the process of transition. Some, like you, are at the very beginning, and some are, you know, almost ready to call a new pastor, and anywhere in between. And so interims, therefore, too, you know, tend to be with a congregation anywhere from a year and a half, at the most. I think, from my personal experience, interim work should not last more than 2 years, because that just is too long. And I've always found that I've been able to do that work within that time frame, unless there is a particular circumstance unique to the situation. But there are people that have been trained to do this work. People are finishing up interims, that's why I'm saying sometimes if you find an interim that is an interesting person that might be a good fit, but they're not quite done yet, you're saying, okay, well, you can, we'll start, we'd rather wait for the right person and have some coverage that is a bridge kind of person. I mean, the congregation that is currently in a similar spot, a little further ahead, but not that much, is the Camden congregation. Because their pastor left at the end of June. They have currently somebody that's a bridge that's serving them, and they have an interim search committee going right now that, I've sent some profiles to, and so they are in the process too of looking at some people. But usually I try to find 2 or 3 people that might be available that you could pick from. It's not, you're gonna get, I don't know how many resumes or something. You don't need to do that, because it likely will be somebody that's in the area within commuting distance, those kind of things. So it's a fluid situation. Any other questions?
And what is the available pool of full-time pastors that we will be working with across the country?
I don't know all the numbers, but when I just got back from vacation, and I spent one morning suffering from jet lag, which made me get up at 4 o'clock or something. So I thought, this will be a good time to see all of the profiles, new profiles for people coming in my inbox since, for the month, and I must have had 20 of them that arrived in my inbox. Now, these are not all interim profiles. Some of them are, are people that are looking for work. They're all over the country. But since I've been here since October, in my inbox has a long list of profiles. So I don't necessarily know how many people are actually in the whole search and call process. That shifts all the time, but there is a good pool of people available. And for the state of Maine, most people looking for work look for full-time work. So you're at an advantage there. Plus, this is the prettiest village in Maine.
Yeah, we know it's not Wisconsin.
I forgot. See, I'm not from Maine, but close to it, right? They have traffic jams. I don't think that's very pretty. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to offend anybody in Wisconsin. There's a give and take about that. But, we also have many churches that are small and are looking for part-time pastoral leadership, and that's a little trickier to accommodate. It depends on how creative and how open people are too. We have lots of gifted people that are in the ministry, and so, but I don't have concrete numbers. And my job is to be the best resource that I can be to you, and to provide you with materials, with answers to questions that you might have in all sorts of ways and shapes. And to make you happy is going to be happy for me, because that's going to look good on my resume, right? So that's my first priority, is to be the best resource that I can to help you what your needs are. So that's my goal. Any other questions?
What should be what should we be looking at during the interim time financially?
Usually, actually, that's a good question, because sometimes congregations say, oh, interim time, we can save some money.
Must have been in the trustees meeting.
Sometimes that might that could be true, but likely won't be true, and it might also not be wise. Most interim pastors, will expect compensation at, most interim pastors are what we call faster pastors, right? Or some interims say we're pastors on steroids, because we do pastoral work plus. In order for you to continue to be faithful to what the needs are, you don't want to get surprised at the end of your search and call process at the end by thinking you've saved a lot of money because you've not really paid your interim pastor, or, kind of tried to save money. It's important to look at all of those ways in which you don't want to set yourself up for big surprises when, a year and a half, 2 years down the road, you need to negotiate a call agreement with somebody coming in, and then you haven't planned for that. So the smartest is to not make major adjustments in that at this point in time, or try not to. The interim pastor, usually the sentiment is that the interims that come in and that have done this often enough, they would like to be paid at the same rate as the pastor who's leaving, if there's a similar experience level and whatever else. But also, or at the rate what you're going to be planning to pay your incoming pastor. Because there are sometimes discrepancies, and there are churches who've not really paid much attention to salary guidelines necessarily, because they haven't had a really need to look at that. So you want to be realistic, and you don't want to get surprised.
May I ask?
Yes, ma'am.
Well, with our pastor, he not only receives a salary, he receives other benefits
Right.
that amount to quite a bit.
Yeah.
And now, is all of that really wise to offer to an interim?
Well, interim pastors are pastors too. Like, I'm an interim pastor. That one of the things that's tricky about interim pastors is that sometimes we have no work in between calls, and we need to also be able to feed ourselves and do all of those kind of things. So we try to work with that. Interim pastors might necessarily, they might have different kind of needs. And so your negotiations in terms of your compensation package for your interim might look different. But the likelihood that there's expectations for continuation of, healthcare benefits, that because that's a tricky thing with UCC healthcare benefits. Once you get out of the program, it's very difficult to get back in. The pension, all of the regular ministerial benefits are just as important for interim pastors as they are for installed pastors.
And you negotiate.
Yes, you negotiate compensation, call agreement kind of package with anybody, similar to what you will be doing at the end of the search journey. There will be a negotiation around how you live into this call agreement. So.
Well, you would expect that.
Right.
For the final minister. I'm
Right.
just a little curious about the interim.
Same thing. There's not really any difference.
Okay, thank you.
And for example, I'm here as an interim. I have a home in Connecticut that my husband and I own, but I have an apartment that I rent. So, we've doubled our housing expenses, not necessarily totally doubled, in order for me to do ministry here. So that affected the way that I negotiated the number of dollars that I have allocated to my housing allowance that I get, because that's the only way that's to my advantage for those kind of things. So there are a variety of ways that interims will have needs or wishes, so that it might look a little different, but. You need to be ready.
You mentioned that you thought it would not be a good idea to have an interim for 2 years. What's the minimum amount of time that you've experienced where it's been successful with an interim?
Well, I think that the search and call process itself, if you do that with the search committee beginning to do its work and that process, that tends to take at least 9 months to a year and a half by itself already, depending on variables involved. So that is not a quick process itself because the search committee and the congregation will have work to do. All I'm saying is for me, that the interim that I did just before coming here in a local congregation, when I was interviewed, they asked me, well, we'd like to do this in 6 months. Can we do this in 6 to 9 months? And I told them, I said, I don't know. I don't know you, but I said it's not likely that that's going to work. And they were a little nervous. I usually contract for a year. And then there's always an out clause in there, but then you can renegotiate for whatever. They were nervous about that. I said, we have a 60-day notice in there. As we find out that we don't like each other after 2 months, we can say that, and then I'll be on my way. But I think I would like to have more than just a 6 months contract, because I think we have work to do. So they agreed to that. Well, I was there for a year and a half. And I think it's a surprise. I mean, because some of the seasons that we have in our church year, some of our high holy seasons, whether it's Lent or Easter or whatever, some of the work that needs to be done slows down during those times. Summertime is sometimes hard to get people together. So some of the work that needs to be done, it tends to always take a little longer than you want it to take. Doesn't always have to. But the other part of it is that I think that it's not unusual for, you don't want to hurry through things too quickly. You don't want to drag your feet either. So my experience has been, and the experience of many people who've done this kind of work over a period of time, is that 18 months to 2 years is an appropriate time. For me, it has been in the past to do that work. If it's a little bit longer, because there might be particular projects that you want to address during that time, depending on what the needs are and what the goals are that you have set for yourself. Could be some unique kind of circumstances.
Why do interims fail? Interim periods fail? I don't mean ministers, but do they fail? And if so, why?
Well, it depends on what you mean by failure.
If the pastor that ultimately gets called comes into something very unexpected.
Well, that's always a possibility. Unfortunately, I've worked with denominational groups that have asked, well, how do we evaluate our interim time? And I've always said, interim time is not necessarily easily evaluated until 3, 4, 5 years into your new call, because work in the congregation is different. It's not you check boxes off, It's sometimes difficult to kind of process that, but I've always looked back on the interims where I've been as successful as when the pastor that came in and stayed till he or she retired or went on to a new call after a significant period of time.
Do you think the fact that we have just very recently done this catch the vision with Renee, that would certainly, I would think, assist us, because
It will help you, yes, sure. It will, any of the work that you've done already, but some of that stuff you might need to revisit too. I think you've done some amazing work already, and that will be helpful. But but there's always a little period of time where you want to get to know one another. There needs to be a little bit of an opportunity to, you need to build some trust, because you need to be able to do some of the work that needs to be done, and so there is some time frame in there. And I think too that that if the search process is done appropriately and done well, it will indicate the time frame too, and that also becomes kind of an evidentiary piece for whether or not the time has been successful. My sad experiences have come when looking back. You know, I've felt sad when I've watched from the outside when search committees have not done their work well. You know, in the end, or when they've rushed, or when they've made poor decisions. You know, I mean, and that's kind of the benefit of our congregational system, that you make your own decisions as local congregations. And sometimes we all, of course, you know, I make decisions all the time, and at least several times a week I wish I hadn't made one of them or the other or whatever. So, you know, you need to kind of reflect on that too, and saying, how do we make wise decisions in a timely fashion that we use to think about what effect it has on the life of the community, not just today, but 5 years down the road or something. You know, that I was at a conference not too long ago for all the interims that get together. The Interim Ministry Network has an annual meeting for continuing education, and the founder of that place, who was the, you know, kind of the saint of interim work, Lauren Mead, came to speak because it was the 35th anniversary, and, you know, this man is like 90 years old or whatever, but you know, he's a very wise man, and, you know, he said, you know, Christianity is in the interim time, which is true too. So that kind of all waters down to our local congregations too. So I think the church, Christianity, and any kind of denominational entity, we're all kind of in flux because the world is in flux. And so in order to kind of maneuver the journey of the bumpy waves, so to speak, of the journey, you know, they're all going to take some time and wisdom and willingness to kind of be in the moment and not want to rush, or not want to just not deal with things. We all have surprises that come our way, and you know, I think I always say you need a great sense of a dose of humor that needs to be ready, because you need to be able to take yourself lightly. You know, he's dead now, but there was a preacher that wrote wonderful little books, and one of them, he said, you know, the reason that angels fly is that they take themselves lightly. So I think that we need to do that too, you know. I know this is a kind of it's a difficult and anxious time, but you need to, you know, you need to stick together and say, we're in this together, and as we had heard in our prayer, we are people of the resurrection, you know. We believe that there is always new life possible. Resurrection happened, but somebody had to die. And sometimes that's a metaphor too for our own life. In order for new growth to happen, we need to, you know, what are some of the things that we might need to let go? So that's also a period, a gift that you can bring to yourself, you know? Just because you've done some project for the last 150 years and it has to be done, and it has to be on the second Thursday of whatever month, because you have to do this, and it's begrudgingly done. Wow. I mean, so those are some things, you know, because we've always done it, are the last 7 words of a dying church, right? We've never done it that way before, or we've always done it this way.
So we're
Yes.
changing deacons meeting for Wednesdays.
Oh, no.
That's my goal tonight.
Okay, yes, ma'am.
Careful, the steeple's shaking.
Will it be part of your responsibility to help Ken in this transition in terms of preparing him that he could prepare an interim for various issues and whatever that are in the church, and and issues
Well,
that
that's-
only the minister needs to know. Is this your role to help him?
I can do that, but I think that, what Ken's role in Ken has an exit process that he needs to tend to. Some of that means, you're going to have a formal exit interview together where he's going to share some of his insights and some of his gifts and some of his wisdom, hopefully. But there are certain kind of, mundane, day-to-day tasks that are there. But some of that work, I think will unfold.
Because we have no one else other than
Right.
him. So that, that the people that he's been seeing and.
Right. And he
various-
needs to be able to find a
Things
way,
that we don't need to know about.
and I'm hoping to have lunch with, at least sometime just to kind of say, okay.
I do lunch.
He does lunch very well.
All right, you do lunch, well, we'll do that, but I mean, his job is to help, to help say goodbye to, and some of that is formal, and we'll do some of that actually in worship, where we officially say goodbye to one another. And that's really important because we do that in the midst of a service of worship, where we say we trust that God is in the midst, and we need to do that because that's who we are as people of faith, and we need to be able to let the Holy Spirit whisper in our ears. So that's the other piece that we need to tend to.
Brad, did you have a
I
question?
just want to back up a little bit in sort of the timeline.
Yeah.
You mentioned several times it's 12 to 18 months or. period of
Whatever,
time
yeah.
For the search committee to do their job.
Right.
But tacked onto that, isn't there the possibility of another, as much as 3 months if the candidate is such a person?
Sure, sometimes too. I mean, yes, depending on that's where, some of that time is flexible or a little bit stretchable because, depending on who the new pastor is that comes in, if you call somebody who's currently serving in a congregation, they might have to give notice because we have an odd way of doing this process and that's kind of the curse of our congregational polity, If I were the Methodist bishop, I would say to you in June, sorry, you gotta leave because I want you to go there and so-and-so is gonna be here in September, but that's not the way we do things. We have an open process and it works for us and it has its advantages and its disadvantages and some of that means that we can't be totally strict with the timeline. So those of you who are really organized and very organized, hourly, minutely, whatever, you plan your day by half an hour at a time. You know yourself well enough, and I'm only looking in through the windows a little bit, and I'm only hearing or reading what I do by snooping on your website or reading reports or those kind of things. It would be pretty arrogant for me to say, oh, I know what's good for you. I might, but I might not. But asking questions, I think, is really important. Yes, sir.
We've, in the recent past, gone through some really controversial times, better for worse, and so on. And, in talking about selecting an interim person and ultimately the selection committee, is there some advice on how we constitute those people making
Yes.
that decision?
Yes. There's in the resources, there are some suggestions as to the best way to put together the kind of people in the congregation that would make up that kind of team. And so there are a variety of ways that congregations do that. And so, I can make some suggestions as to a good way. That is a very important question, and it's an important way to think about, because you want a team of people, no more, 7 to 9 people at the most, that form that ultimate search team. You want that group of people to be the trusted representatives of your whole congregation. And there are some very creative ways that you get those people nominated. It's usually not a good idea to ask people to volunteer for that. for a variety of reasons. But there are ways that, one of the most successful ways that I watched it in a church where I was an interim pastor, and we batted around ideas in the church council about how to best put together his team. And that was a congregation that had gone through some pretty traumatic conflict. But so what ended up happening actually was, and I thought it was a brilliant idea, where there was an invitation for the whole congregation, and this was the question. The people were to look around on Sundays in the pews, and then the question they were asked to say, we're going to make up a team of people that is our search team. It needs to be a diverse group of people representing all sorts of, gender and age groups and whatever interests, but we also want the best possible wise people. So I want you to think about somebody that you know in this congregation that you would trust your life with. Give me that person's name. And if everybody does that, and they did that, saying, who would you trust your life with? Or your firstborn child, or whatever. But who do you trust to make wise decisions on your behalf? And so they did that, and they had a whole bunch of names. And so they wrote down all the names, and they looked at how many of those people were nominated by the congregation. But they needed to be people that were actively involved in the life of the church. So that's why you say look around on Sunday mornings, whatever. And then they looked at, what category they would fit, whether they were in the senior group or the youth group or the choir people or whatever. So, and then actually it ended up being a marvelous group of people that really had the trust of the whole congregation. That was a diverse group. And it worked like a charm, and it worked very well. And that probably is one of the search committees that I worked with as an interim pastor that I was just amazed with, because the search committee really does work on behalf of. It's not for them. They do it on behalf of the whole congregation. Ultimately, when they come to you and say, we have found the person that God wants to be here, because you want to know a secret? God already knows who your new pastor is going to be. Because God has already picked him or her out. I know that for a fact because she told me. So your job is to make sure that you have a team of people that is open to finding that person and to listening for the Holy Spirit to whisper that person's name in their ear. So ultimately, when that team comes and says to the church council, here, this is the person God has sent us, and we think this is the person God has sent us to. That person comes and meets you and greets you and preaches one sermon, and then you vote. Well, you don't vote on that person. You vote. It's a vote of confidence in your search committee. You trust they've done the discernment and the work that is necessary to get to know somebody well enough to know that it is a good fit in your midst. And meeting somebody for a couple of times is not enough to know that. But so that's why it's really important that the search team that gets put together is the right team. And there are special qualities, and there's a wonderful kind of process in the resources too that makes some suggestions as to how to do that.
Kind of a follow-up to
Okay.
this. We perhaps are in a fairly unique situation of having over a dozen ministers that are members of this congregation. Is it wise or is it unadvisable to seek their opinions?
From where I sit, I would say that is a very bad idea. Because I think it is ethically inappropriate for us as clergy, when we are ordained, we sign a code of ethics. I can give you a copy of that. And that really sets us up for creating very clear boundaries around what it means to be a pastor of a church and how we manage our relationships. And especially when we retire or when we leave, we also make promises. And it's very, very tricky because I'm sure that I think I know a couple of them that are members here. I'm sure they are all wonderful pastors, but that would put them in very awkward positions because we are a very small community in a lot of ways. I've been amazed at how many people I've run into that I know or whatever, or, it's like, and so I would try not to get them involved in that. That would just make it odd and uncomfortable at times, and it's just not a good thing. It just is tricky around boundaries. What do you think, Ken?
I was just thinking, there was one of those on the search committee that brought me.
I mean, things have changed a little bit too, but we try to be very sensitive to really, to be really clear about our role, because our role as ministers is a different role in a congregation, and it gets very tricky, and it can get very messy, and it can get very uncomfortable.
Can I do one more?
Yeah, you can do 10 more, of course.
You can look around this room
Uh-huh.
and you can sort of make some observations about the demographics,
Right.
who's here.
Yeah,
And there's some very clearly missing
Right.
demographics.
yeah.
Is there any way where we can get an input into this process from those that are not here? Obviously, we're talking about youth and younger people, young families, and
Well,
if we're hoping to build this church.
right, and you are not alone, and this is probably one of the trickiest pieces to the puzzle that churches are dealing with in a lot of ways. I mean, if you have younger people in your congregation, I hope that, at least there might be some willing to participate in being part of something like that. But we're all very aware that in most congregations, in mainline congregations, there are 1 or 2 generations missing. And that's a reality that we're trying to deal with in a variety of ways. And I don't think there is a magic wand that works on making that work. We do the best we can, and we try to be as open as we possibly can. But we also need to be true to who we are. So that is, the first question usually asked in an interview is, well, how are you going to bring in all these young families and children that we want and need? Number one, why do you want families and children? Good question to ask. But the other part of it is that that's not an easy answer to that, because it's the way the world of the church is working these days, and I think that our concept of how and whom we consider to be part of the church is a question that we need to struggle with too. How do we determine who is part of our community of faith? People don't join things anymore, and it's not just limited to churches. It's all across any kind of organizational piece. But the other piece to it is that it's an issue that is a question in many places, and you're not the only congregation that raises it. I don't have magic answers. I wish I did. I wouldn't be here probably, you know? Yes,
Let's talk a little bit about the search committee itself.
Right.
Once those individuals are picked and they
Yeah.
agree to serve on that committee, is that a closed committee or is that an open committee? They often communicate to the congregation?
They- both. It is a committee that works, that has tasks to do. And some of those tasks, hopefully, they will draw on many people in the congregation to help them do that. For example, putting together that resume. Because there are other people that is a combination of just data, numbers, but also there are the deep questions that are being asked in that the whole congregation needs to participate in answering. So, but once that's done, and then once the committee gets to the point when it is going to be considering potential candidates, then it becomes a very closed group, because that's a very confidential process because of the way that we work in our quirky process. So it's both and. Hopefully, they will continue to communicate much of what they do, even if they say, you know, we are doing a lot of hard work, we're meeting every week, you know, whatever, but the details sometimes are not able to be shared. Hey,
I'm not sure if Gerald is saying enough is enough.
it could be, are you ready? Come here, come here.
I didn't even
Come here.
see.
That's why you're
Come up here,
running.
come up here. There. He has all the answers.
If we could only speak.
He goes on the committee.
Hey, sit,
Are there any other questions for,
speak.
all right.
Okay, well,
Well, I heard amen in that.
I heard the name of your next minister.
Oh, wow. It is a National Dog Day today.
It is, yes it is. Yeah. We're very thankful to have him here to celebrate with us. I hope you all feel as good as I felt on Monday, with a real sense that Ineka's there to help us through this. And this isn't the only time she can answer questions for us. And let's keep the doors open and I must have dropped some pizza over here.
Now, if we have questions, what's the process for asking them? Go through Pam or go directly to you, Ineke?
Either way, I mean, but it might be helpful just to, you know, and Pam has my contact information. And I forgot, I might have some business cards somewhere, and I don't know if
And I don't have time to edit, so whatever you send me, I'm going to send straight to Ineke.
Well, yeah, I wondered if we should send it to Ineke with this copy to you at the same time, so you know what we're asking about.
I appreciate
I have 4 business cards, and I suggest, my cell phone number is on there, my email address is on there. The office number on there is the office number in Augusta. I'm not very often in Augusta, but I do have a home office number too, so my cell number is probably the best to start out with. So whoever wants to fight may fight over my
Why don't you stay?
contact information, but it might be, you know, however it works. I'm pretty good with the phone and email and all that good stuff. And if I don't have the answer to a question, I'll find out.
I want to thank you from the bottom of our hearts here. Thank you. You have done a great job for us tonight.
Well, and I'm sure there's probably a lot more questions that will be coming, and
Very well.
that's good, because those are really good. Oh, the full disclosure. You know, Brad went to high school with my husband. That's the small world we live in. It is.
All right, do we want to take a 5-minute break before we get back to the rest of the agenda?